The day the Voronezh hegemony eclipsed Earth's sun, Commander Sarachin was drinking terrible coffee in the observation deck of Lunar Station Tranquility. She remembered that detail with crystalline clarity because she'd been mid-sip when the alarms began their catastrophic wailing, and she'd burned her tongue so badly that it blistered. The coffee drifted away in globules as artificial gravity stuttered, and through the massive reinforced windows, she watched humanity's worst nightmare unfold in absolute silence. The alien vessels materialized like a conjurer's trick, thousands upon thousands of them, emerging from quantum slipspace in perfect geometric formation. They weren't ships in any terrestrial sense. Each craft was a living organism, a biomechanical horror that pulsed with bioluminescent veins of sickly purple light. They ranged in size from personal fighters no larger than old Earth automobiles to dreadnoughts that dwarfed Manhattan Island. And they moved with unified purpose, positioning themselves in a perfect Dyson-like lattice between Earth and Sol, their collective mass beginning to dim the life-giving light that had nurtured humanity since the species first crawled from the oceans. Sarah's neural implant crackled to life, flooding her consciousness with emergency protocols and panicked transmissions from every military installation between Mars and Mercury. Her hands moved with trained precision, activating the station's defense grid even as her mind raced through impossible calculations. The Voronezh had been a distant rumor, a cautionary tale shared among the outer colony explorers who ventured beyond the Kuiper Belt. Intelligence had suggested they were expansionist, resource-hungry, and utterly without mercy. But no one had predicted this. No one had imagined they would be bold enough, or desperate enough, to choke off Earth's primary star. Within 18 minutes of the blockade's initiation, the temperature on Earth's surface dropped by 2 degrees Celsius. The descent was subtle, barely noticeable to the 8 billion souls going about their daily lives, but Sarah knew the mathematics. She'd studied stellar dynamics at the New Beijing Institute. She understood exactly what would happen if that lattice remained in place. 72 hours until global agricultural collapse. 1 week until mass panic set in. 2 weeks until the first freezing deaths in equatorial regions. 3 weeks until civilization began its terminal descent into chaos. 3 months until Earth became an ice-locked tomb, another dead world orbiting a sun it could no longer see. The communications officer, a young man named Torres whose hands shook as he worked his console, managed to establish a link with Earth Defense Command. General Harrison Okoye's face materialized in holographic form, his features carved from stone, his eyes reflecting the same desperate calculation Sarah was performing. All stations, all vessels, condition absolute zero. This is not a drill. We are implementing Protocol Arcturus immediately. May whatever gods we believe in have mercy on us all. Protocol Arcturus. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water. She'd trained for it, every officer in the United Earth Space Command had, but no one actually believed they'd ever implement it. Arcturus was humanity's final contingency, the last desperate gambit when facing existential annihilation. It meant total military mobilization, the immediate conscription of every armed vessel from corporate mining haulers to private yachts, the activation of weapon systems that had never been tested outside of simulation, and the commitment of every human life in the solar system to a single purpose, survival at any cost. Her crew looked to her, 23 souls who had been drinking the same terrible coffee, playing zero-gravity handball, complaining about the monotony of lunar duty just minutes before. Now they were the first line of defense against an enemy that had demonstrated technological supremacy so absolute it bordered on divine power. Sarah squared her shoulders and felt something ignite in her chest, something primal and defiant that had been passed down through countless generations of humans who had faced impossible odds and somehow, miraculously, survived. "Battle stations," she said, and her voice didn't waver. "Charge all rail cannons. Deploy the kinetic missile arrays. Sync our targeting systems with the fleet network. And someone get me a damage assessment on what we're actually facing." The answer came not from her crew, but from an unexpected source. The communications array chimed with an incoming transmission on a quantum band that shouldn't have existed, using encryption protocols that were theoretically impossible. Torres stared at his readouts like they'd personally betrayed him. "Commander, I'm receiving a Type B message. It's coming from inside the Vornash formation. The encryption is partial human, partial something else. It's requesting to speak with you specifically." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. A trap. A psychological warfare tactic. A defector, though that seemed impossible given what little they knew about the hegemony. Trace it. Full security protocols. If this is some kind of digital weapon, I want it isolated before it touches our core systems. Already done, Commander. The trace is, this is strange. The signal is coming from a mid-sized Vornash vessel, but the quantum signature has human markers embedded in it. Whoever is sending this has intimate knowledge of our communication architecture. Torres looked up, his young face pale in the emergency lighting. "Commander, they're using your personal encryption key. The one from your time with Deep Space Reconnaissance. That was impossible. Those keys were quantum entangled, generated from random cosmic radiation patterns and secured in classified databases that were supposed to be impregnable. Only a handful of people in the entire solar system would even know she possessed such a key, and most of them were dead, lost in the dark spaces between stars on missions that officially never happened." Sarah felt a ghost walk across her grave. "Put it through. Audio only. Keep weapons hot." The voice that emerged from the speakers was female, human, and achingly familiar despite the years and distance that should have rendered it unrecognizable. "Hello, Sarah. I know you don't have time for lengthy explanations, and I know you have no reason to trust me. But if you want Earth to survive the next 72 hours, you need to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. "Kira? Kira Navarro?" The name felt like broken glass in her mouth. Kira Navarro had been her partner during the Proxima expedition, the 2-year mission that had been humanity's first attempt at establishing contact with potentially intelligent alien life. They'd been more than partners. In the cramped confines of the survey ship Magellan, surrounded by the infinite black and the weight of cosmic loneliness, they'd become something that didn't have neat labels. And then Kira had vanished during a routine surface expedition on Proxima B, her emergency beacon going dark, her biosigns flatlined, her body never recovered despite 3 months of desperate searching. That had been 6 years ago. Sarah had mourned. She'd raged. She'd finally, agonizingly, accepted. And now that voice, impossible and real, was speaking to her from inside an alien war fleet that was killing Earth by inches. "It's me," Kira confirmed, and Sarah could hear the pain beneath the urgency. "I don't have time to explain everything. The Vornash picked me up after my crash. They're not what you think, Sarah. They're desperate. Their home system is dying, consumed by something they call the Hunger, a form of dark matter entity that devours stellar radiation. They've been fleeing it for 3 generations, and Earth's sun is the first viable star they've found that isn't already claimed by species powerful enough to annihilate them. So they're planning to annihilate us instead?" Sarah's voice was acid. "They're murdering 8 billion people because they're desperate? That's their justification?" "No," Kira said urgently. "They're not trying to kill anyone. The lattice isn't a weapon, Sarah. It's a harvesting array. They only need to siphon off a fraction of Sol's output, an amount so small that Earth's climate would barely register the change. But their technology is imperfect. The lattice is bleeding away too much energy, far more than they intended. It's malfunctioning, and they're too proud and too terrified to admit it. The hegemony's leadership would rather die than show weakness to an inferior species by asking for help." Sarah's tactical mind was already dissecting the implications. "You're telling me this is an engineering problem? Not an invasion?" The idea was almost more infuriating than malicious intent. Humanity was facing extinction because of alien incompetence and pride. "Yes. And I think we can fix it. the Vornash technology is biological, grown rather than built. It's incredibly advanced in some ways, but they have massive blind spots. They don't think like we do. They can't conceptualize certain types of mathematical solutions because their neural architecture is fundamentally different. But I've been working with one of their engineers, a brilliant individual named Jather, who believes there might be a way to recalibrate the lattice to proper specifications. We need human mathematical models, our quantum computing algorithms specifically. And we need them in the next 60 hours, or the lattice will reach critical cascade and the blockade will become permanent. Torres was frantically signaling her, pointing to his displays where dozens of Earth military vessels were beginning their attack runs on the Vornash formation. Plasma cannons were charging. Nuclear-tipped missiles were arming. Humanity was preparing to throw everything it had against an enemy that might not actually be an enemy at all, and the counterattack would be devastating. The Vornash, thinking they were fighting for their survival, would obliterate the human forces, and any chance of peaceful resolution would evaporate in the nuclear fire. "I need proof," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline singing in her veins. "Give me something concrete, Kira. Something I can take to command. Because right now I'm the only thing standing between you and a full-scale military response that will kill you and probably doom both our species." There was a pause, filled with the subtle hum of incompatible technologies struggling to maintain connection. Then Kira spoke again, and there was something new in her voice. Something that sounded like hope and terror in equal measure. "I'm sending you technical specifications for the lattice, including the malfunction parameters. And I'm sending you something else. Biometric data. Sarah, the Vornash, they're not just using me as a translator. Their technology requires biological integration. To survive among them, to gain their trust, I had to accept certain modifications. I'm still human, where it counts, but I'm also something else now. And Jather, the engineer I mentioned, we've formed a bond. Not just professional. The Vornash concept of partnership is different from ours, more intense, more permanent. I need you to understand what you're potentially fighting for here. It's not just two species. It's the possibility of something neither of us has ever imagined." The data began flooding Sarah's systems, dense packets of information that would take their best scientists hours to fully analyze. But even a cursory glance showed her what she needed to see. The mathematical models were consistent. The energy bleed calculations matched their own observations. And the biometric data on Kira showed impossible things, hybrid cellular structures that should have killed her but instead seemed to have enhanced her, quantum-entangled neural pathways that suggested her consciousness was somehow distributed across both human and Vornash biological matrices. Sarah made her decision in the space between heartbeats, the way she'd been trained to do when everything hung in the balance and hesitation meant death. "Torres, get me General Okoye on priority channel. Tell him I have intelligence that could change everything. And someone find me Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Quantum Mathematics Division. If we're going to save the world by teaching aliens how to fix their broken sun-stealing machine, we're going to need the smartest people we have." She looked out at the Vornash lattice, at the dimming sun beyond, and felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders. Somewhere in that alien formation, Kira was waiting, transformed into something humanity had never seen, in love with something humanity had never imagined, betting everything on the hope that Sarah would choose cooperation over carnage. "Kira," Sarah said quietly, "I'm going to need you to arrange a meeting. Face to face. Me and your Jather and whoever else needs to be in the room. Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to thread this impossible needle, I need to look them in the eyes. I need to see what you've become. And I need to know if the trust you're asking for is something they're capable of returning. They'll see it as weakness," Kira warned. "The hegemony's culture is built on dominance hierarchies. Requesting a meeting, especially from a position of desperation, will undermine what little political capital Jather has managed to accumulate." Sarah smiled, and it was the predatory expression of a human who had been backed into a corner and found the experience clarifying rather than terrifying. "Then we don't request. We demand. You tell your Jather that Commander Sarachan of the United Earth Space Command is willing to negotiate a solution that saves both our species. But it happens on our terms, in a neutral location, with full transparency. And if the hegemony is too proud to accept those conditions, then they can try to survive the combined fury of every human weapon currently targeting their fleet. We might not win, but I guarantee we'll make them remember us. There was a long silence. Then Kira laughed, and the sound was entirely human despite everything she'd become. God, I missed you. 6 years in an alien empire and I'd almost forgotten what human audacity sounds like. I'll make it happen. Jather has access to a diplomatic shuttle. We can meet on your lunar station in 4 hours. But Sarah, when you see what the Vornash really look like, when you understand what I've chosen to become, I need you to keep an open mind. Promise me. Sarah looked at her crew, at the young faces watching her with desperate hope, at the earth hanging blue and precious in the window, at the dimming sun that had nurtured their entire species. She thought about impossible choices and the strange paths that desperation carved through the universe. I promise, she said. 4 hours. Don't be late. The connection severed, leaving Sarah alone with decisions that would reshape human history. General Okoye would resist. The military command would call her a traitor or a fool. But she'd seen something in those technical specifications, a pattern that suggested possibility. And she'd heard something in Kira's voice, beneath the strangeness and the years of separation. Hope. Real, fragile, precious hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity wouldn't face this darkness alone. She turned to her crew and began issuing orders, each one carrying them further from standard protocol and deeper into uncharted territory. Outside, the Vornash lattice continued its work, stealing light and time. The clock was running. Humanity had 60 hours to do the impossible. Sarachan intended to use every second. The diplomatic shuttle that docked with Lunar Station Tranquility 4 hours later looked like something grown in a fever dream. Its hull rippled with chromatic scales that shifted between deep purples and blacks, pulsing with internal light that suggested respiration rather than mechanical function. Sarah watched through the observation port as the docking tendrils extended, organic and unsettling, interfacing with their airlock in ways that made the station's metal groan with what almost sounded like discomfort. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood beside her, the quantum mathematician's fingers dancing nervously over her tablet as she reviewed the Vornash technical data for the 100th time. The mathematics are beautiful, Yuki whispered, her eyes wide with the kind of wonder only a true scientist could maintain while staring at potential extinction. Their harmonic resonance calculations are poetry. But they're solving three-dimensional problems with four-dimensional tools. It's creating cascade errors they can't even perceive. No wonder the lattice is malfunctioning. General Okoye had given Sarah exactly 1 hour to make this work before Earth's combined military forces began their assault. 1 hour to bridge the gap between species that had never spoken, to solve an engineering crisis that neither civilization fully understood, and to decide whether the future held cooperation or annihilation. She'd faced worse odds before, though she couldn't immediately remember when. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere, and Sarah got her first look at the Vornash. Jather entered first, and the alien was simultaneously magnificent and terrifying. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their body was a masterwork of biomechanical evolution, covered in segmented armor that seemed to be part exoskeleton, part living tissue. For arms extended from a torso that tapered in ways human spines couldn't achieve, each limb ending in hands that possessed too many fingers arranged in radial symmetry. But it was Jather's face that captured Sarah's attention, angular and elongated, with compound eyes that fractured light into rainbow patterns, and beneath them, a series of breathing apertures that flexed in rhythms that might have been speech or emotion or something humans had no framework to understand. Behind Jather came Kira, and Sarah felt her breath catch. Her former partner was still recognizably human, but the modifications were profound and impossible to ignore. Luminescent tracery ran beneath her skin like living tattoos, pulsing in sync with Jather's bioluminescent patterns. Her eyes had been altered, the irises now containing flecks of the same compound structure as Vornash optics. And when she moved, there was a fluidity that suggested her muscular system had been enhanced, optimized, transformed into something that borrowed from both evolutionary trees. "Sarah," Kira said, and her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before, undertones that resonated in frequencies just below human hearing. "Thank you for this. I know what you're risking." Shother spoke then, their voice emerging from a translation device that hung at their chest, converting their native language into precise, almost clinical English. "Commander Chen. I am Shother of the Botanical Caste, Chief Engineer of the Harvest Fleet. Kira Bridges has spoken of your capabilities with great emphasis. I confess I was skeptical that a species as young as yours could offer solutions where our finest minds have failed. But desperation makes pragmatists of us all." Sarah felt her spine stiffen at the condescension, but she channeled the irritation into focus. This was exactly the opening she needed. "Chief Engineer, your finest minds created a stellar harvesting lattice that's malfunctioning so catastrophically it's going to kill 8 billion members of my species in less than 3 weeks. So forgive me if I'm not particularly impressed by Vornash intellectual superiority. What I am impressed by is your survival instinct. You've fled across light years to escape extinction. So have we, in our own way. Humanity has spent its entire existence staring at an uncaring universe and refusing to die quietly. That gives us something in common." The compound eyes fixed on her, unblinking and inscrutable. For a long moment, Sarah wondered if she'd miscalculated, if her aggression would trigger a diplomatic incident that would end any chance of cooperation. Then Jother made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, though it sounded like crystal wind chimes in a storm. "Kira Bridges said you possessed fire spirit. I see she understated the matter. Very well, Commander. Let us dispense with posturing and face our mutual crisis with honesty. The lattice is indeed failing. Our biological computers cannot identify the error because they process stellar harmonics through quantum organic matrices that, as your Dr. Tanaka has already surmised, introduce dimensional artifacts we cannot perceive. We need a perspective outside our own cognitive architecture. We need your mathematics, crude and mechanical as they may be." Yuki stepped forward, and despite being barely 5 feet tall and facing an alien that towered over her, the mathematician showed no fear. "Chief Engineer, I've analyzed your lattice specifications. The elegance of your design is remarkable, but you're using recursive harmonic algorithms that create standing waves in the energy transfer. These waves compound over time, increasing the bleed-off exponentially. In 3-dimensional space, this would be catastrophic. In the quantum foam where you're actually operating, it's creating reality distortions that amplify the problem by orders of magnitude." Jother's attention shifted entirely to Yuki, the massive alien leaning down to examine the mathematician with what seemed like genuine interest. "You can perceive the quantum foam interactions? Your species possesses that level of theoretical sophistication?" "We possess desperation and stubbornness," Yuki replied, pulling up holographic displays that filled the air between them with cascading equations. "And apparently a tendency to solve problems from angles you haven't considered. Look here, if you introduce a counter-harmonic dampener at these 7 nodes, you create interference patterns that collapse the standing waves. The lattice efficiency actually increases while the energy bleed drops by 94%. Sarah watched as Jother's entire posture changed, the alien's 4 arms moving in complicated gestures that the translator couldn't interpret but which seemed to convey intense excitement. Kira moved closer, her modified eyes scanning the equations, and Sarah saw the moment when understanding bloomed across her transformed features. "It works," Kira breathed. "Jother, she solved it. The counter-harmonic approach, it's so simple we couldn't see it. Our biological processors are optimized for complexity, for finding elaborate solutions to elaborate problems. But this is elegant simplicity. This is human." The Vornash engineer was already interfacing with their own technology, tendrils of living circuitry extending from their forearms to connect with portable computing nodes. Data streamed between biological and mechanical systems in ways that made Sarah's head hurt to watch. "The mathematics are sound," Jother confirmed, and there was something new in the translated voice. "Respect, perhaps. Or wonder. Implementation will require recalibrating 4,312 individual lattice nodes. With our standard protocols, this would take 16 days. We have less than 60 hours. Then we don't use standard protocols, Sarah said, her mind already racing through logistics. We have 1,200 Earth vessels currently positioned for attack. Every one of them has engineers, technicians, people who are very motivated to not freeze to death. We share the recalibration specifications across both fleets. Your people handle the biological integration aspects, our people handle the mathematical implementation. We work together, in parallel, across the entire lattice simultaneously. Shafir's breathing apertures flared in a pattern that might have been shock. You would trust your vessels to approach our fleet? To work alongside Vornash crews? We are still strangers, Commander. Hours ago, we were enemies. Such cooperation requires a level of faith that seems dangerously naive. Sarah thought about all the times humanity had been called naive, reckless, too trusting or not trusting enough. She thought about every first contact scenario that had gone wrong in human history, and the few precious ones that had gone right. She thought about Kira, who had literally allowed herself to be transformed by alien biology because she believed in the possibility of bridges between species. Chief Engineer, my species has a saying, trust, but verify. We'll work alongside your crews, but we'll also have weapons charged and targeting solutions locked. If this is an elaborate trap, you'll find that humanity is very good at taking our enemies down with us. But I don't think it's a trap. I think you're desperate, proud, and terrified, which makes you exactly like us. And I think that when two desperate species have a choice between mutual destruction and mutual survival, choosing survival isn't naive. It's the only logical option. Kira stepped fully into the space between them, her hybrid form a living symbol of the impossible bridge they were attempting to build. Sarah's right. Both our species have survived by adapting to impossible circumstances. This is just another adaptation. Shafir, you've taught me so much about Vornash resilience, about the strength of your people's determination to endure. Let me show you what human resilience looks like. Let our species teach each other. The way Kira looked at Shafir in that moment told Sarah everything she needed to know about the depth of their bond. It wasn't just professional respect or survival partnership. This was something profound, a connection that had formed in the crucible of desperate circumstances and grown into something that transcended biology. The bioluminescent patterns on Kira's skin synchronized perfectly with Shafir's natural rhythms, a visual harmony that spoke of intimacy and understanding. Shafir reached out with one of their four hands, the too many fingers gently touching Kira's face in a gesture that was unmistakably tender despite its alien configuration. Very well, the engineer said quietly. We will trust. We will cooperate. And perhaps, if we survive this crisis, we will have created something more valuable than a repaired lattice. Perhaps we will have created a future neither species could have built alone. The next 57 hours existed outside normal time, compressed into a frenetic blur of activity that would later be remembered as the lattice crisis, though those who lived through it would always call it the impossible days. Sarah coordinated from Lunar Station Tranquility, transforming the observation deck into a joint command center where human and Vornash officers worked side by side, struggling through language barriers and conceptual differences to achieve synchronized action across millions of miles of space. Dr. Tanaka became an unlikely hero, her mathematical models translated into implementation protocols that both species could follow. She worked for 36 hours straight, sustained by terrible coffee and the kind of manic energy that only comes from knowing that billions of lives depend on getting the equations exactly right. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, a Vornash mathematician named Kixinael took over her station, using their four arms to simultaneously work multiple calculation streams while making what the translator insisted were jokes about human inefficiency. Yuki, reviving after a forced 4-hour rest, laughed until she cried and then dove back into the work with renewed determination. In the field, human engineers in hardened spacesuits worked alongside Vornash technicians whose bodies could survive vacuum without protection, both groups united by the universal language of desperate problem-solving. There were moments of tension, a human vessel that got too close to a Vornash dreadnought and nearly triggered an automated defense response, a Vornash worker who accidentally damaged a human tool and nearly sparked an international incident. But each crisis was resolved through communication, through the fragile trust that was being built one interaction at a time. Kira and Jather became the bridge's living embodiment, moving between human and Vornash work crews, translating not just language but cultural context and intention. Sarah watched them work and saw the future taking shape in real time. They moved in unconscious synchronization, Jather's height and reach complementing Kira's human intuition and adaptability. When they touched, which was often, the bioluminescent patterns that marked Kira's transformation blazed with light that seemed to communicate emotions beyond words. They're bonded, General Okoye observed during one of his periodic check-ins. The general's initial hostility had transformed into cautious optimism as the lattice recalibration proceeded ahead of schedule. I've been reading the xenobiological reports. What she's done, accepting those modifications, it's not reversible. She's committed to living between worlds now. Sarah nodded, watching Kira laugh at something Jather had said, the sound-carrying harmonics that were neither fully human nor fully Vornash but something entirely new. She's happy, sir. Maybe happier than I ever saw her when she was just human. Who are we to judge what form love takes when it crosses the stars? 56 hours and 43 minutes after the crisis began, the last lattice node was recalibrated. Yuki's counter-harmonic dampeners activated in perfect synchronization, and across the vast array that surrounded Sol, standing waves collapsed into organized energy flow. The efficiency curve spiked upward while the bleed-off plummeted exactly as the mathematics had predicted. Earth's surface temperature stopped its deadly descent and began, slowly but measurably, to rise. The cheer that erupted across the Joint Command Center was a sound Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. Humans and Vornash together, celebrating survival, celebrating success, celebrating the fact that two species had faced the abyss and chosen cooperation over destruction. Dr. Tanaka was embraced by Kixinael in a forearmed hug that lifted her off her feet, the mathematician shrieking with laughter that held no fear, only joy. Jather approached Sarah, moving with the careful dignity of their rank and culture, but the compound eyes showed something that the translator couldn't quite capture. Gratitude, perhaps. Or recognition. Commander Chen, your species has given mine a gift beyond measure. We will siphon only what we need, and in return, we offer knowledge, technology, and alliance. The hegemony leadership will resist this change, but they will adapt or be replaced by those of us who understand what has happened here. Humanity has proven itself worthy of respect. Sarah extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement, and after a moment's hesitation, Jather unfolded it in one of their radial-fingered grips. The contact was warm, strange, and profoundly moving. Chief Engineer, I think we've both learned something valuable. The universe is too vast and too dangerous for any species to face alone. Maybe it's time we all started building bridges instead of walls. Kira joined them, tears streaming down her modified face, her bioluminescence pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as profound emotion. Thank you, she whispered to Sarah. Thank you for taking the chance. Thank you for seeing past the fear. Sarah pulled her former partner into an embrace, feeling the strangeness of Kira's transformed physiology but also the fundamental humanity that remained. Go build your future, she said softly. Both of you. Show the universe what's possible when love refuses to acknowledge boundaries. As the crisis ended and the real work of alliance building began, Sarah stood at the observation deck window and watched the lattice shimmer with properly regulated light. The Vornash would stay, harvesting solar energy in perfect balance with Earth's needs. Humans and aliens would learn from each other, struggle with each other, and ultimately build something neither could have imagined alone. In the distance, a Vornash shuttle departed for deep space carrying Kira and Jather toward new adventures and unknown horizons. Sarah raised her cup of terrible coffee in silent salute, honoring the courage it took to love across impossible distances and transform fear into hope. Humanity had done the impossible. But then again, that was what humanity did best. When the universe presented barriers, humans built bridges. When faced with extinction, they found solutions. And when offered the chance to connect with something utterly alien, the best of them chose understanding over fear. The sun shone through the lattice in regulated brilliance, warming Earth and feeding an alien fleet in harmonious balance. Above, the stars beckoned with infinite possibility. Humanity and the Vornash would venture into that darkness together now, no longer alone, no longer merely surviving, but truly living in a universe that had suddenly become far more wondrous and far less lonely. Sarah smiled and turned back to her duties, ready to help build the impossible future that had just begun.